Central Heights Hospital, a symbol of medical excellence among the elite, is about to face an unexpected shock. When Jennifer Garner, an outstanding black nurse, joined the team, she had no idea that she would encounter subtle discrimination from her colleagues. Tensions erupted when a doctor decided to humiliate her in front of Eric Dane, who seemed like an ordinary patient. But no one could have predicted that his presence would completely change the dynamics at Central Heights. Jennifer Garner walked through the doors of Central Heights Hospital with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The hospital's long, pristine hallways gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting off the white tiles, making the space feel cold and sterile. The overwhelming scent of disinfectant filled the air, causing her to feel a slight wave of nausea. Despite this, Jennifer maintained her confident posture, determined to make a strong impression on her first day. As she approached the reception desk, the atmosphere seemed to shift. Conversations around her quickly turned into hushed whispers. Nurses and other staff members either turned away or avoided making eye contact with her. Jennifer felt the familiar sting of isolation, a feeling she'd faced many times throughout her career. She steadied herself, swallowing the rising anxiety. "Hello," she said softly but firmly. "I'm Jennifer Garner, the new nurse. Can you direct me to the head nurse's office?" A blonde nurse briefly looked up from her computer screen, glancing at Jennifer for a moment before offering a polite but distant smile. However, in that smile, there was no sign of friendliness. "The head nurse's office is at the end of this hallway. Third door on the right," she said, her tone gentle but cool. Jennifer thanked her and quickly walked away, fully aware of the lingering gazes following her. The sound of her shoes echoed in the empty corridor, each step reverberating in the stillness. She knew she was being watched and judged, but Jennifer refused to let it undermine her confidence. As she neared the office, a nearby door swung open, and a tall man in a white coat stepped out. He had graying hair and an air of authority. This was likely a senior doctor. Jennifer's heart raced with the hope of making a good impression on an important colleague. "Good morning, doctor," Jennifer greeted with a warm smile. "I'm Jennifer Garner, the new nurse. It's a pleasure to meet you." The doctor, whom she assumed was Thomas Muller, barely glanced at her, his cold gray eyes betraying no warmth. "I'm Thomas Muller," he said curtly. "I hope you've been briefed on the rules and regulations here." Before Jennifer could respond, Dr. Mueller continued, "We maintain high standards at Central Heights. I trust you're prepared to meet them." Without waiting for her reply, he walked down the hallway, leaving Jennifer standing there, her hand slowly lowering after an unacknowledged handshake. Though disheartened by his cold demeanor, Jennifer knew she couldn't let it affect her spirit. She took a deep breath, raised her head, and knocked on the head nurse's office door. As she waited, memories of past challenges and her mother's words came flooding back. "My dear," her mother had once said, her voice warm but filled with concern. "You'll have to work twice as hard as others, but never let them see you falter. You're strong, and you will overcome." Those words had always been Jennifer's greatest source of strength, especially during difficult times. She recalled the countless hours spent studying in nursing school, the long nights, and the many times others had doubted her. But she had always proven her worth through hard work and unwavering determination. Now, as she faced a new challenge at Central Heights, Jennifer knew she would rise above it, just as she had done so many times before. The stares and the discrimination she faced today were just another test. She was here to work, to prove herself, and she wouldn't let anyone stand in her way. The door opened, and before Jennifer stood a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a stern demeanor. "Jennifer Garner, I presume," the woman said, her tone flat but cold. "Follow me. We have a lot to do, and I don't have time to waste." Jennifer quickly followed the head nurse into her office, feeling the weight of unfamiliarity and pressure as she stepped into Central Heights. The hospital seemed entirely different from what she had known before. Beneath its polished and professional exterior, there was an undercurrent of invisible tension that she couldn't quite grasp. But Jennifer soon realized that her presence would soon become the factor that changed everything, sparking confrontations no one had anticipated, unearthing secrets that had long been buried. Her first day quickly turned into a whirlwind of introductions, meetings, and endless paperwork. Jennifer tried her best to familiarize herself with her colleagues and surroundings, but she couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. Conversations among staff often ceased as soon as she approached, only to resume in hushed whispers after she had passed. Every effort Jennifer made to engage with others was met with polite but distant responses, leaving her feeling more alone in an environment that should have been supportive. By the end of the day, exhausted, Jennifer packed up her belongings from her locker. She overheard the whispers of two nurses nearby. "Did you see the new nurse?" one asked, her voice low. "Yeah, I did. I don't know what they were thinking about bringing her here. Central Heights isn't for people like that," the other replied, her disdain barely hidden. The words pierced Jennifer like a dagger. Her hand froze on the locker door, and a wave of sadness and frustration washed over her. The hope that the distance and coldness were merely first-day jitters had vanished. The painful truth was clear. She would have to face discrimination and prejudice in a place where her work should have been valued based on merit and dedication, not skin color. As she left the hospital, the weight of the day pressed down on Jennifer's shoulders. She trudged toward the bus stop, her heart heavy with a sense of loneliness and exclusion. The excitement and expectations she'd had at the start of the day had faded, replaced by anxiety and mental exhaustion. Sitting down on the hard bench, Jennifer pulled out her phone and dialed the familiar number. After a few rings, her mother's warm voice came through on the other end. "Hi, sweetheart. How was your first day?" Hearing her mother's voice, Jennifer felt her throat tighten. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I'm exhausted, Mom," Jennifer whispered. "I didn't expect it to be this hard." There was a brief silence before her mother spoke, her voice full of understanding and strength. "Jennifer Marie Garner, listen to me. You've worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let anyone make you feel less. You're a Garner, and you're fighting not just for yourself, but for the young girls who dream of being in your shoes one day." Jennifer closed her eyes, letting her mother's words sink in. "I know, Mom, but I didn't think it would be this tough." "Nothing worth having is ever easy, sweetheart," her mother replied. "But you carry the strength of generations before you. Stand tall, work harder than anyone else, and never let them see you falter. Understand?" "Yes, Mom," Jennifer replied, feeling the resolve return. "I won't give up." As she hung up, Jennifer looked up and suddenly saw a sleek black Mercedes slowly passing by the bus stop. Behind its tinted windows, she caught a glimpse of Dr. Thomas Muller, the head of surgery, who briefly glanced at her before the car sped off. Jennifer took a deep breath, straightening her posture, her mother's words echoing in her mind. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't alone anymore. With her family's support and her determination, Jennifer believed she could face and overcome any challenge Central Heights threw her way. When the bus arrived, Jennifer stood up, ready to face the next day. She had no idea that her presence at Central Heights would soon ignite a chain of inevitable events, shattering the hospital's facade and forcing it to confront long-hidden prejudices. In the weeks that followed, Central Heights Hospital gradually became a more stifling environment, where the pressure grew daily, making Jennifer Garner's job increasingly difficult. From her first day, she had sensed the isolation, but now it had transformed into a more subtle, insidious form of exclusion that was no less painful. Every glance and every action from her colleagues seemed to carry a hidden judgment, especially from Dr. Thomas Muller, a man Jennifer always felt was watching her every move. Without words, It was clear to Jennifer that she was being treated differently from the white nurses. Dr. Mueller frequently sought out small, insignificant mistakes in Jennifer's work, despite her meticulous attention to every task. One morning, he called her out loudly at the reception desk, where all her colleagues could hear. "Nurse Garner, I hope you're accustomed to our procedures by now. We don't tolerate any mistakes here." Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine as he emphasized the word mistakes. She raised her head and met his gaze, showing no fear. "Of course, Dr. Mueller. I strictly follow the hospital's procedures." He raised an eyebrow, a smirk of mockery forming on his lips. "We'll see if that's true," he muttered, as if waiting for her to slip so he could belittle her. As Dr. Mueller turned and walked away, Jennifer could feel the invisible pressure he had placed on her. Throughout the day, she was consistently assigned the most difficult and stressful tasks, while her colleagues received lighter shifts. This didn't happen just once. It was nearly every day. Jennifer realized she was constantly being given the most challenging and demanding patients. "Jennifer, could you help me with Mr. Henry in room 305? A fellow nurse asked sweetly, but with a hint of insincerity. "He seems a bit grumpy this morning." Jennifer nodded, knowing that grumpy was an understatement. Mr. Henry was notorious for his racist outbursts, and just this week alone, he had reduced 2 nurses to tears. Despite this, Jennifer entered the room with calm professionalism, determined not to show any weakness or loss of control. She knew this was more than just a task. It was a test. As soon as she entered the room, Henry looked up and saw her, his eyes filling with anger. "What are you doing here?" he roared. "I told them I don't want any black nurse touching me." Jennifer took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure in the face of his bigotry. She couldn't let his words affect her resolve or her work. "Mr. Henry, I'm here to check your vitals and change your bandages. I am fully qualified to care for you." Throughout the entire procedure, she endured a barrage of insults and slurs, but Jennifer remained steady, completing her work with precision and care. She refused to let his cruel words distract her. When she finally finished and stepped out of the room, she was startled to find Dr. Mueller standing in the hallway, his eyes filled with curiosity and smug satisfaction. "Everything all right in there, Nurse Garner?" His voice dripped with false concern. "We heard quite a bit of commotion." Jennifer calmly met his gaze, standing her ground. "Mr. Henry's vitals are fine, and I've finished changing his bandages. Is there anything else you need from me, Dr. Mueller?" For a brief moment, surprise flashed across Dr. Mueller's face, but it was quickly replaced by his usual condescending expression. "Well, I hope you can maintain that composure with all the other patients. We wouldn't want any complaints, would we?" Jennifer watched as Dr. Mueller walked away. She could feel that she had just gone through a trial, one she should never have had to face simply because of her skin color. Jennifer Garner's shift seemed endless, a repetitive cycle of relentless work and subtle jabs only she could truly perceive. These remarks were sharp and precise, not overtly rude, but piercing enough to linger in her mind throughout the day. She constantly double-checked everything she did, not because she doubted her abilities, but because she knew that even the smallest mistake would be used to undermine her, and she couldn't let that happen. Looking around, Jennifer couldn't help but notice the difference in how her white colleagues worked. They appeared relaxed, laughing and chatting, while she carried a far heavier workload. Every time Jennifer thought of speaking up, her mother's image flashed in her mind, along with the advice that had stayed with her all her life. "Never let them see you weak." Those words kept her steady, helping her push forward even when her body and mind were exhausted. When her shift finally ended, Jennifer was physically and mentally drained. As she packed her belongings, she overheard whispers behind her that made her pause. 2 colleagues were talking, their tones filled with mockery. "Can you believe all this fuss they're making about hiring?" one voice scoffed. It's not like they can do the job better than we can." Those words struck Jennifer like a blow. Her heart raced, and she wanted to confront them, to stand up for herself. But she knew that any pushback would only worsen the discrimination. Instead, she chose silence, gently closing her locker and walking out of the hospital, her head held high despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. On her way to the bus stop, Jennifer paused as a sleek black Mercedes rolled by and stopped right in front of her. The window lowered, revealing the familiar face of Dr. Thomas Muller. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Nurse Garner, waiting for the bus again?" Thomas Muller's voice dripped with sarcasm. "I suppose that's all you can afford on a nurse's salary." Before Jennifer could respond, he sped away, leaving her standing there with the sting of humiliation deep in her heart. His words weren't just an insult, but a cruel reminder of the battle she faced daily at Central Heights. Boarding the bus, Jennifer felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. The excitement she once had when she first stepped into Central Heights was now a distant memory. She had hoped this place would be a chance to prove her skills, but the reality was far from what she expected. Yet, amid all the chaos of her emotions, something in her remained firm. A small voice from within, a resilient legacy passed down from her mother. Something has to change, she thought to herself, but the question was whether she was strong enough to endure. Jennifer had no idea that, in a short time, an unexpected ally would appear. This person would help her expose the truth and force people like Thomas Muller to confront their biases. In the dim evening light, Jennifer closed her eyes, drawing strength from her mother's words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was determined to face them head-on, refusing to back down from what lay ahead. The next morning, Jennifer Garner walked into Central Heights with a renewed spirit. Throughout the night, she had reflected on the hardships and recent experiences in her work. However, she reminded herself why she chose to become a nurse in the first place: to help people, regardless of the challenges or pressures from her surroundings. Even though she often faced judgmental looks or unfriendly attitudes from her colleagues, Jennifer continued to push through, holding firmly to her belief in her work. As she approached the reception desk, she quickly noticed an unusual commotion. Nurses were hurriedly preparing a patient room, and the atmosphere in the hospital felt tense, with an urgency she hadn't seen before. People rushed past, whispering to each other, their faces a mix of stress and excitement. "What's going on?" Jennifer asked a nearby colleague, curious about the chaos around her. The nurse, putting aside her usual coldness toward Jennifer, responded with enthusiasm. "We're about to admit a VIP patient, a big-time businessman who had a skiing accident. They say he broke both arms." Jennifer was about to ask more when Dr. Thomas Muller, the stern and notoriously demanding physician, appeared with his familiar demeanor, though this time his face carried a more contemplative expression than usual. "Nurse Garner," Dr. Muller said, in his usual stiff tone, "I need you to oversee our new patient in room 412, Mr. Eric Dane. He's suffered severe injuries from a skiing accident and has broken both arms. Ensure he gets the best care. I won't tolerate any mistakes with this case." Jennifer quickly nodded. She understood this was no ordinary request. Something about this patient seemed far more significant than others. "Understood, Dr. Muller. I'll take care of it immediately." Jennifer hurried toward room 412, unable to shake her growing sense of unease. The hospital always had its fair share of important patients, but something about the atmosphere this time made her pause. There had been too many whispers about Mr. Eric Dane, and now she was directly involved in handling the situation. As she opened the door, Jennifer saw a middle-aged man lying in the hospital bed, both arms tightly bandaged. Despite his injuries, he exuded an air of authority and strength. She could feel the calm confidence and power emanating from his sharp gaze. "Good morning, Mr. Dane," Jennifer greeted, approaching the bed with a soft smile. "I'm Nurse Jennifer Garner, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay." Eric Dane lifted his head, his eyes scrutinizing Jennifer. "Good morning, Nurse Garner," he replied, his tone firm, completely at odds with his current injured state. "I appreciate your assistance. Never thought a skiing accident would bring me here." Jennifer began checking his vitals and assessing his condition. She couldn't help but notice how Mr. Dane watched her every move with precision. Unlike many other patients, his eyes held no contempt or disdain, just careful observation. "You seem very skilled, Nurse Garner," Eric Dane remarked as Jennifer adjusted his IV. "How long have you worked at Central Heights?" Jennifer was slightly startled by his unexpected interest. Typically, patients didn't pay much attention to the nurses, but the way Mr. Dane asked made her feel like the question came from genuine curiosity. "I've been working here for a few weeks," Jennifer responded cautiously. "So far, it's been a memorable experience." Mr. Dane raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Interesting," he said, his voice laced with a hint of intrigue. "Do you find this hospital living up to what they advertise?" Jennifer hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Before she could say anything, Dr. Muller suddenly entered the room, his face displaying a forced smile. "Mr. Dane!" Dr. Muller exclaimed, his voice forced with enthusiasm. "I trust Nurse Garner has been taking excellent care of you. We only assign our best staff to important patients like yourself." Jennifer could sense the insincerity in Dr. Muller's words, especially since he had never shown any confidence in her abilities before. Eric Dane, however, seemed to notice this as well. "Yes, Dr. Muller," Dane replied, his gaze shifting between the doctor and Jennifer. "Nurse Garner has been doing very well. I was just asking her about her experiences here at the hospital." Dr. Mueller hesitated for a moment, but quickly regained his usual self-assured demeanor. "I'm sure she would tell you that everything here is excellent," he said smugly. "We take great pride in the supportive and inclusive environment at Central Heights." Jennifer struggled to contain the rising anger in her chest, though Dr. Muller's words made her uncomfortable. But Eric Dane seemed to sense the tension in the air. "Really?" Mr. Dane muttered, his sharp eyes still fixed on Jennifer. "I hope to experience this wonderful environment you speak of during my stay." Dr. Muller quickly changed the subject, launching into an explanation of Dane's treatment plan, but Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that the earlier conversation was far from simple. The way Eric Dane observed her, the way he inquired about the hospital, it felt as if he was digging deeper, trying to understand what Central Heights was hiding beneath its polished surface. In the days that followed, Jennifer found herself visiting Mr. Dane's room more frequently, spending more time there than with her other patients. He not only asked her about her work, but also showed genuine interest in her personal experiences. This made Jennifer realize that, despite his position of power, Eric Dane lacked the prejudices she had often encountered from other patients and colleagues. One quiet afternoon, as Jennifer Garner was carefully changing Eric Dane's bandages, she overheard whispered voices from just outside the patient's room. The conversation sent a chill down her spine. "No matter what Dr. Muller says," a harsh voice muttered, "I don't trust Jennifer with a VIP patient like this. Who knows what she might do?" "Exactly," another voice responded. "But if we speak up, people will just accuse us of being racist." The comment made Jennifer's hands tremble slightly. She continued with her work, but the weight of the mistrust and suspicion surrounding her became almost unbearable. Cold stares and a lack of trust were nothing new to her, but today it felt heavier. Eric Dane, with his sharp awareness, immediately sensed her discomfort. "Are you all right, Nurse Garner?" he asked, his tone gentle but filled with concern. Jennifer forced a smile and tried to keep calm. "Yes, Mr. Dane. I'm just trying to make sure your bandages are perfect." Eric was silent for a moment, watching her intently with a deep, thoughtful gaze. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I've always believed that the true nature of a person isn't shown in how they treat those in power, but how they treat those they consider beneath them." Jennifer looked up, impressed by the depth of his words. Eric's eyes met hers, full of understanding, as though he had seen more than she had realized. "I've been through a lot in my life, Jennifer, and I have to say, from where I'm sitting, I see more than you might think." Before Jennifer could respond, Dr. Thomas Muller entered the room, interrupting their conversation. Jennifer excused herself, leaving with a sense of unease. She couldn't shake the thought that Eric Dane was more than just an ordinary VIP patient. He seemed to have a clear understanding of everything happening at Central Heights. In the following days, Jennifer felt increasingly isolated at the hospital. Colleagues who had previously been cold toward her now displayed outright hostility. They whispered behind her back and gave her malicious glances. Thomas Muller, no longer worried about being held accountable, became even more overt in his intimidation tactics. Every day at work became a battle Jennifer couldn't escape. Yet, the meaningful words from Eric Dane lingered in her mind, giving her a small glimmer of hope amid the growing adversity. One quiet morning at Central Heights, Jennifer Garner was reviewing patient files at the nurses' station, trying to manage the ever-increasing workload. Suddenly, Dr. Thomas Muller, infamous for his strict demeanor, approached her with a stack of files in hand, his face showing clear indifference. "Nurse Garner," he said coldly, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "I need you to handle these cases today. They won't be easy, but I'm sure you're up to the task." Jennifer glanced at the pile in front of her. As she had suspected, the workload was twice as much as her colleagues. The unfairness of the assignment was obvious, but she refused to let it get to her. She raised her head, meeting Thomas Muller's gaze with a steady and professional expression. "I'll take care of it right away, Dr. Muller," Jennifer responded calmly, her voice resolute. As Thomas Muller walked away, a smirk of satisfaction appeared on his face. She overheard him mutter, "Let's see how she handles this mess." The entire day, Jennifer moved nonstop from patient to patient, each case more complex and difficult than the last. She had no time to rest, not a single moment to pause, yet she maintained her professionalism and dedication. The patients she cared for required special attention, many with demanding needs or irritable temperaments. Still, Jennifer refused to let anyone see how exhausted she truly was. Although she consistently completed her tasks flawlessly, the growing pressure was taking a toll on her both physically and mentally. As she hurried to respond to yet another patient call, she overheard a conversation between two colleagues. "Can you believe they're making her handle all these tough cases?" one nurse whispered, her voice laced with sarcasm. "It's like they're waiting for her to mess up." "Yeah, but you've got to admit, she's really good," the other replied, with a mix of admiration and doubt. "If it were me, I would have collapsed by now." Jennifer felt a surge of anger and frustration. Not only was she being unfairly burdened with difficult tasks, but she was also under constant scrutiny from her colleagues, who seemed to be waiting for her to fail. The feeling of isolation and the weight of the pressure grew heavier on her already weary shoulders. At the end of the day, Jennifer Garner often found herself visiting Eric Dane, one of the hospital's most respected elderly patients. Unlike the other rooms, his felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could momentarily find peace and experience genuine respect. "Nurse Garner," Dane greeted her as she entered for her routine checkup. "You look tired. Is everything all right?" Jennifer forced a faint smile, trying to mask her true emotions. "It's just been a busy day, Mr. Dane. But nothing I can't handle." Mr. Dane looked at her with genuine concern, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding. "You know," he said slowly, "there's a big difference between merely handling things and truly excelling. From what I see, you're not just capable. You have the potential to shine." His words stood in stark contrast to how her colleagues and superiors treated her. A lump formed in Jennifer's throat as she realized how deeply isolated she had felt. "Thank you, Mr. Dane," she replied, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "I appreciate your concern." As she prepared to leave the room, Mr. Dane suddenly called out to her. "Nurse Garner," he said, his voice commanding her attention. "Remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to speak up." Jennifer left the room, her mind swirling with thoughts of his words. She couldn't have predicted that the events of the following day would force her into a confrontation she had long tried to avoid. The next morning, as Jennifer Garner entered Central Heights, she immediately sensed the tension in the air. Rumors had spread that a highly critical surgery would take place in the afternoon, with members of the hospital board and other influential figures present. As she began her work, she couldn't ignore the anxiety permeating the hospital. Both nurses and doctors seemed to be under pressure from the looming event. Around mid-morning, Dr. Thomas Muller approached Jennifer, his sharp gaze instantly putting her on alert. "Nurse Garner," he said in his usual calm tone, though there was an undertone of something more. "We need you to assist in this afternoon's surgery. It's a very important case. I trust you're prepared for this task." Suspicion rose within Jennifer, but she maintained her composure. Being selected for such an important surgery should have been an honor, but with Dr. Muller involved, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. "Of course, Dr. Muller," she replied, her voice filled with determination. "I'll be ready." As he turned away, Jennifer overheard him whisper to a colleague, "Let's see how she handles the pressure. This should be interesting." She knew this challenge wasn't just about her technical skills. It was a test of her will. The surgery began, and Jennifer Garner felt out of place among the senior doctors in the operating room, including Dr. Thomas Muller. The pressure in the air seemed to double with the presence of outside observers, making the situation even more tense. However, with her years of experience, Jennifer didn't let anything affect her focus. She remained completely dedicated, and every action was precise and efficient. She anticipated what the doctors needed, handing over instruments at the exact moment, showcasing her expertise without needing guidance. As the operation continued, Jennifer began to notice something was wrong. Dr. Muller, usually known for his confidence and decisiveness, appeared nervous and hesitant. His hands trembled as he prepared to make a crucial incision, and in that fleeting moment, Jennifer realized he was about to make a grave mistake that could endanger the patient's life. Without hesitation, Jennifer spoke up. "Dr. Muller," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I think we should reconsider our approach. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer to change the angle of the incision." The room fell silent immediately, and all eyes turned to Jennifer. Thomas Muller looked at her with a mixture of shock and fury. For a brief moment, Jennifer feared he would dismiss her suggestion outright. But after a few tense seconds, Muller reluctantly nodded. He adjusted his technique, following Jennifer's advice, and as the surgery continued, it became clear that her recommendation had saved the patient. When the operation concluded successfully, Jennifer could sense a shift in how others viewed her. Some of the doctors began looking at her with newfound respect, while others, particularly Thomas Muller, struggled to hide their simmering anger. As the team started to clean up, Muller turned to Jennifer, his voice low and threatening. "Nurse Garner, I want to see you immediately." Jennifer's heart raced as she followed Muller out of the operating room. She knew she had done the right thing, but couldn't shake the fear of what the consequences might be. Challenging a senior doctor like Muller, in front of others, could very well cost her job. They entered Mr. Eric's room, a high-profile patient still under treatment at Central Heights. It seemed Muller was too angry to realize this. As soon as the door closed, he spun around, his face red with fury. "Who do you think you are, challenging me in front of everyone?" Muller growled. "Do you even know who you're dealing with? If it weren't for my mercy, you'd be out of a job for your disrespectful attitude." Jennifer stood tall, her voice steady. "Dr. Muller, I was simply doing my job. The patient's safety." My job? Mueller interrupted, his voice growing louder. Your job is to follow my orders, not assume you know better than your superiors. That's why people like you don't belong in prestigious places like Central Heights. You're only here because of some ridiculous diversity policy, not because of your skills. Mueller's words were laced with racism and malice, fueling Jennifer's anger and despair. As he continued his tirade, Jennifer realized this wasn't the first time she had faced injustice, but it had never been so blatant and hateful. Jennifer stood frozen, struggling to contain the boiling rage, as Dr. Thomas's insults echoed in the room. The blatant discrimination left her ready to defend herself. But just as she was about to respond, a strong, authoritative voice cut through the tension. Dr. Mueller, Eric Dane's voice rang out, breaking the silence. It seems you've forgotten where you are and who you're speaking to. Both Jennifer and Dr. Mueller turned, stunned to see Eric sitting up in his bed, his face calm, but his eyes blazing with controlled anger. His gaze locked onto Mueller, who immediately began to pale with fear. Mr. Dane, Mueller stammered, his voice trembling. I didn't realize you were awake. I sincerely apologize for disturbing you. Oh, I'm far more aware than you think, Dr. Mueller, Eric replied, his voice cold as ice. And I've been awake long enough to witness how you and others here at Central Heights have disgracefully treated Nurse Garner. Jennifer stood there, her heart pounding, struggling to believe what she was hearing. The man who had always been so quiet and courteous now radiated an overpowering authority, making the entire room feel small before him. Mr. Dane, Mueller stammered, trying to regain his composure, his voice still trembling. There must be some misunderstanding. There's no discrimination happening here. Misunderstanding? I don't think so. Eric cut him off, his voice sharp. What I've seen is harassment and blatant discrimination, and I will make sure it stops immediately. Mueller, feeling his power slipping away, stammered, Who are you? Eric Dane smiled, but it was a smile filled with threat. I'm someone who can decide this hospital's future, Dr. Mueller. And right now, I see no reason to continue supporting an institution that tolerates such unprofessionalism. As the tension in the room mounted, Jennifer Garner couldn't stop the mix of emotions swirling inside her. Part of her felt relief that someone had finally witnessed the treatment she'd been enduring for so long, yet she couldn't hide the anger over the injustice she faced daily. Somewhere inside, a flicker of hope ignited. Maybe things were about to change. None of them could have predicted that this small confrontation would be the catalyst for a chain of events that would shake Central Heights to its core. The prejudices, long hidden in the shadows, were about to be exposed, forcing everyone to confront and reassess the hospital's deeply ingrained culture. The air in Eric Dane's room became suffocating as his words lingered. Dr. Thomas Mueller, his confidence rapidly evaporating, struggled to maintain his composure. Mr. Dane, he began, his voice faltering. I didn't know. Enough, Eric Dane interrupted, his voice decisive and commanding. We need to have an honest discussion about this hospital's culture, don't we? Just as Dr. Mueller was about to respond, a knock on the door heightened the tension further. A young nurse entered, her face etched with worry. Her voice trembled. Dr. Mueller, the hospital administration is looking for you. It's urgent. Mueller glanced at Eric Dane, then back at the nurse, visibly torn between his options. Finally he nodded, tension evident in his every movement. We'll continue this conversation later, Mr. Dane, Mueller said hastily, then turned to Jennifer. You're dismissed for now, Nurse Garner. As Dr. Mueller quickly exited the room, Jennifer found herself alone with Eric Dane. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, with unsaid words suspended between them. Nurse Garner, Eric Dane finally spoke, his tone much softer than before. I think it's time I properly introduce myself. My name is Eric Dane, and I'm the CEO of Nova Health, one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the country. Jennifer was utterly stunned by this revelation. Nova Health wasn't just a massive healthcare entity. It was a powerful force with extensive influence in the industry. Suddenly, Dane's earlier comments about controlling the fate of Central Heights made perfect sense. "Mr. Dane, Jennifer fumbled, unsure how to respond. "Please, have a seat." He gestured toward the chair beside his bed. "I think we need to talk more." Over the next hour, Eric Dane recounted his experiences at Central Heights. He hadn't planned on being treated there, but his skiing accident had brought him to the hospital. During his stay, he'd observed some troubling issues within the hospital's culture and systems. "I came here expecting top-notch medical care," Dane said gravely. "But instead, I witnessed an environment rife with discrimination and unprofessionalism. This goes against every value I stand for as a leader in healthcare." He continued explaining that he had seen firsthand the unfair treatment Jennifer had endured, from small, daily slights to signs of a much larger systemic problem. What Jennifer had experienced wasn't just personal injustice. It was symptomatic of a deeper issue eating away at the institution. "Your experience, Nurse Garner, is unfortunately not an isolated one," Dane said, his voice a mix of anger and resolve. "But it cannot continue, and I won't let it." As they continued to talk, Jennifer felt an enormous weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time since starting at Central Heights, she felt truly heard and understood. Eric Dane listened patiently as she detailed her experiences, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "Thank you for your honesty, Nurse Garner," he said as she finished. "Your resilience in the face of these challenges is truly commendable. But I believe it's time we change the system instead of expecting people like you to just endure it." Jennifer realized that this wasn't just a conversation with a patient. It was an opportunity for real change. And with the backing of a powerful organization like Nova Health, that change could happen. At that moment, Jennifer Garner knew she was no longer alone. She wasn't just a nurse left to fend for herself amidst a broken system. She now had a powerful ally, someone who was ready to stand up for her and others in similar positions. Just then, there was a knock on the door, and the hospital administrator, looking visibly tense, stepped into the room. "Mr. Dane," she began, her voice laced with concern. "I understand you've taken an interest in the operations of our hospital. I assure you we are taking these issues very seriously." Eric Dane raised an eyebrow, his expression sharp and unyielding. "Is that so? Because what I've seen here suggests this hospital is more concerned with maintaining outdated and inequitable systems." The administrator immediately paled, clearly unprepared for such harsh criticism. I believe we've implemented some programs to promote diversity," she stammered, her voice lacking confidence. "Programs alone are not enough." Eric Dane cut her off, his tone firm. "What Central Heights truly needs is a complete cultural overhaul, starting from the leadership team." Over the next few hours, Eric Dane laid out specific demands. He called for a thorough investigation into any signs of discrimination within the hospital, mandated diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and insisted on revising the recruitment and promotion processes. "As for Dr. Mueller," he continued, his voice serious, "I want a full investigation into his conduct. What I've witnessed isn't just unprofessional. It's potentially dangerous for patient safety." The administrator, fully grasping the gravity of the situation, could only nod, her voice weak. "Yes, Mr. Dane. We'll begin immediately." A tumultuous day at Central Heights Hospital began as the news of Eric Dane's true identity spread rapidly. His demands, whispered throughout the hospital corridors, sparked chaos. The air was thick with tension, as many employees worried about their jobs, while others felt a glimmer of hope for long-awaited changes. Jennifer Garner, once overlooked and disregarded by many, had suddenly become the center of attention. She was still reeling from the whirlwind of events. Colleagues who had once been indifferent or cold towards her had changed their tone. Some offered awkward apologies, while others sought to gather information about the upcoming reforms, thinking she had inside knowledge. At the end of her shift, Jennifer decided to return to Eric Dane's room. She wanted to check on him and perhaps reconnect with the unexpected changes in her life that had unfolded in just one day. As she entered, she found Eric propped up on pillows, clearly exhausted, but with a satisfied gleam in his eyes. "Nurse Garner," Eric greeted her warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I've recommended you for the new diversity and inclusion committee we're establishing. Your experiences and insights will be invaluable as we reform Central Heights." Jennifer was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions: gratitude, hope, and excitement for a new role she had never imagined. "Thank you, Mr. Dane," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to express what this means to me." Eric simply shook his head with a gentle smile. "It's not me you should thank, Nurse Garner. It's you who deserves the gratitude. Your perseverance and professionalism in difficult times have inspired me. You reminded me why I chose this path in healthcare: to make a real difference in people's lives." As Jennifer left the hospital that night, she felt as though a new chapter had begun, not only for her, but also for Central Heights. The days ahead would likely be filled with challenges, but for the first time in her career at the hospital, she felt a profound sense of hope. The upcoming changes promised to not only shake up Central Heights, but potentially leave a lasting impact on the healthcare system, beginning with the story of a dedicated nurse and a special patient. In the days that followed at Central Heights, the atmosphere became more chaotic than ever. The revelation of Eric Dane's true identity caused a media storm that rippled through every corner of the hospital. The prestigious facade of the institution now seemed like a fragile cover, barely hiding the long-standing internal issues no one had dared to confront. On Monday morning, as Jennifer Garner entered the hospital, she immediately noticed the change in the air. News vans were parked outside, reporters standing by, waiting for interviews with anyone who could provide information. Inside, small groups of staff huddled together, whispering anxiously about what was to come. As Jennifer approached the reception desk, she saw Dr. Thomas Muller being escorted by security. Their eyes met briefly as he passed, his expression a mix of confusion and anger before he was led into the administration office. "Jennifer!" a voice called from behind her. She turned to see Lisa, a nurse who had once been cold to her, walking towards her with an embarrassed look. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you," Lisa said sincerely. Jennifer offered a small, polite smile, unsure how to respond. Just then, the overhead speaker announced, "All staff are required to attend an emergency meeting in 30 minutes. Attendance is mandatory." As Jennifer entered the meeting room at Central Heights, the space was packed. She found a seat near the back, feeling the weight of many eyes on her and hearing the hushed whispers around her. Up front, she spotted Eric Dane, now dressed in a sharp suit, his arms still bandaged, standing and speaking with the hospital administrators and what appeared to be several important figures from Nova Health. The room quieted down as Eric stepped up to the podium. His commanding presence immediately captured the attention of everyone in the room. The murmurs quickly died down, replaced by a palpable tension. "Good morning," he began, his deep voice steady and strong. "For those who don't know me, I'm Eric Dane, CEO of Nova Health. Over the past week, I've been a patient here at Central Heights following a serious skiing accident. During my recovery, I had the opportunity to witness firsthand how this hospital operates, as well as its culture and work ethic." Eric paused, looking around the room, ensuring he had everyone's full attention. "What I witnessed was truly alarming," he continued, his tone now firmer. "I saw an environment rife with discrimination, favoritism, and unprofessional behavior, things that should have no place in a modern healthcare system." The room buzzed with murmurs once again, Some of the staff looked uneasy, while others nodded in agreement with Eric's assessment. "To be clear," he said sharply, "what I witnessed, particularly in the treatment of Nurse Jennifer Garner, was not an isolated incident. These are signs of a much larger systemic problem, one that has been ignored for far too long." Jennifer could feel the eyes of the room turning towards her. She sat up straight, meeting the gaze of her colleagues with calm confidence. Eric went on to outline the reforms he planned to implement immediately. These included a comprehensive investigation into discriminatory practices, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a major overhaul of the hospital's hiring and promotion procedures. In addition, he continued, his voice even more resolute, those found guilty of discriminatory behavior will be held accountable. This includes Dr. Thomas Muller, who has been suspended pending a full investigation into his misconduct. A fresh wave of murmurs swept through the room. Jennifer could see Dr. Muller's supporters looking shocked and uncomfortable, while others seemed relieved and even pleased. "Change is difficult," Eric concluded, his voice softening slightly. "But we must do what's right. A diverse and inclusive work environment isn't just about ethics. It ensures that we provide the best care for our patients." Eric Dane's speech caused a seismic shift in the room, as he concluded with a surprising announcement. "Finally," he said, "I'm pleased to introduce the person who will be leading these important changes. Jennifer Garner has agreed to take on the role of Director of Diversity at Central Heights. With her extensive experience and deep understanding, I do not doubt that Jennifer will be an invaluable asset in our efforts to reform this hospital." Jennifer could hardly believe what she was hearing. Shock, pride, and a hint of nervousness coursed through her as the room erupted into applause. She had expected to be a small part of the diversity committee, but had never imagined being chosen for such a prominent role. Taking a deep breath, she began to walk to the front, feeling curious and, in some cases, skeptical gazes of her colleagues. Some looked at her with newfound respect, while others' expressions were colder, even hostile. As she stood at the podium, Jennifer could feel the weight of her new role pressing down on her. But she remained composed, offering a small smile before speaking. "Thank you, Mr. Dane. I want to emphasize that I'm not here to stand against anyone, but rather as a colleague who deeply believes in the potential of Central Heights and all of you. We will face challenges, but I am committed to working with everyone to build an environment where every employee is valued and every patient receives the best care they deserve, regardless of their background." As she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. A few people nodded in agreement, while others sat in silent contemplation. Even those who had been indifferent or antagonistic toward her before now seemed to take her more seriously. Her sincere words had struck a chord. After the meeting, Jennifer was surrounded by colleagues. Some came to congratulate her, others offered apologies for past misunderstandings, and still others, though hesitant, made attempts to reconcile. The atmosphere at the hospital had shifted noticeably. While tension and skepticism remained, the feeling of positive change and hope began to grow within the staff. The next day, Jennifer, Eric Dane, and the leadership team began the first steps toward fulfilling their promises. The work ahead was challenging, but it filled Jennifer with a powerful sense of purpose. For the first time since she had started at Central Heights, Jennifer felt she was truly making a difference. That evening, as Jennifer Garner prepared to leave Central Heights, she was surprised to see Eric Dane waiting for her near the exit. His presence caught her off guard, but his warm smile quickly put her at ease. "Nurse Garner," he greeted her kindly. "Or should I say, Director of Diversity Garner. How does it feel?" Jennifer smiled, a bit weary after a long and eventful day. "Mr. Dane, it's been quite a day. To be honest, I'm still trying to process everything that's happened." Mr. Dane nodded, understanding. "I get it. Change like this is always hard, but I want you to know that I have complete faith in your abilities. You're the perfect person to lead these changes at Central Heights. Your resilience and honesty in facing every challenge are what made me believe in you." As they walked out of the hospital together, the twinkling nightlights created a peaceful contrast to the bustling day inside. Eric Dane stopped, turning to Jennifer with a serious look. "I want you to know that Central Heights is just the beginning. I plan to implement these changes throughout the entire Nova Health system. Your story, Jennifer, has the potential to ignite a broader transformation in how we approach diversity and inclusion in healthcare." Jennifer could feel the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but instead of fear, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't going to be an easy task, but she was ready. "Mr. Dane, I'm ready to face any challenge," she said confidently. "Together, we can create real, lasting change." As they parted ways, Jennifer walked away, deep in thought. The events of the past few days had completely altered her life. Once an overlooked nurse, she now stood at the forefront of a movement that could transform not just Central Heights, but the entire healthcare industry. The road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, and there would be resistance from those unwilling to change. But as Jennifer glanced back at the hospital one last time before leaving, she felt a fire ignite within her. This wasn't just her job anymore. This was her mission. A mission to ensure no healthcare worker would ever endure what she had gone through. With steely resolve, Jennifer left Central Heights, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Change had begun, and with it, a new chapter in the fight for equality and inclusion had opened. In the months following Eric Dane's revelation of his true identity, Central Heights Hospital underwent a profound transformation. This change went beyond management processes or patient care. It marked a complete cultural and attitudinal shift for the entire organization. Jennifer Garner, once a quiet, overlooked nurse, now took on the role of Director of Diversity with an important mission: to change the toxic and discriminatory work environment that had persisted for too long. This transformation began after Eric Dane, a special patient who had been admitted following a skiing accident, was revealed to be the CEO of Nova Health. This major healthcare conglomerate owned several hospitals, including Central Heights. On his first day at the hospital, no one knew who Eric was. Even Thomas Muller, a renowned doctor known for his discriminatory behavior, insulted Jennifer in front of Eric, not realizing that Eric was the CEO of the entire hospital system. Muller's rude and cold behavior toward Jennifer not only hurt her, but became the tipping point for addressing the long-standing discriminatory practices at the hospital. After fully recovering, Eric could not forget what he had witnessed. Seeing Jennifer treated unfairly spurred him to make a change at Central Heights. Thus, a series of reforms were launched. Jennifer, with Eric's constant support, began planning and implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion programs for all hospital staff. Initially, these training sessions faced strong resistance from many, especially long-serving conservative doctors like Thomas Muller. Some even mocked the programs, dismissing them as a temporary movement. But Jennifer was undeterred. Having once been a nurse who nearly lost hope after enduring so much discrimination and injustice throughout her career, she now had the power to change that, not just for herself, but for all healthcare workers at Central Heights. She tirelessly worked to develop comprehensive training programs focused on changing mindsets, fostering respect, and encouraging inclusivity among colleagues. Each training session was a step closer to breaking down the walls of discrimination within the organization. Meanwhile, Thomas Muller, who had always looked down on those not of his status, became the focal point of an internal investigation, not only because of his behavior towards Jennifer, but also due to complaints from other staff members about his disrespectful attitude and discriminatory actions over the years. The investigation concluded with a clear result. Thomas Muller was terminated from his position. This decision sent a strong message that discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated and that everyone at Central Heights would be held accountable for their actions, no matter their power or reputation. With Muller's departure, the hospital gradually began to change. Jennifer Garner and her team continued to implement programs aimed at improving the work environment, focusing not only on diversity, but also on encouraging collaboration and mutual support between departments. Staff who had previously felt isolated or overlooked began to notice the shift in workplace culture, and many found the courage to speak out about the injustices they had previously endured. With every step forward, Central Heights became not only a better workplace, but also attracted attention from other hospitals and healthcare organizations. Jennifer began receiving invitations to speak at healthcare conferences about diversity and inclusion. 1 year after Eric Dane's first admission to Central Heights, Jennifer stood on the stage of a national healthcare conference, facing a packed audience. The room was silent as she prepared to share her story. 1 year ago, Jennifer began, her voice strong but sincere. I was just a nurse who had nearly given up. I had witnessed the daily injustices that so many people like me face. But today, I stand here before you as proof that change is possible. That one voice, if persistent enough, can make a difference. She went on to share her journey and the changes that had taken place at Central Heights, not shying away from discussing the challenges she and her colleagues had faced along the way. But along with those challenges came the successes, the lives that had been touched, the hearts that had been changed, and the culture that had been reshaped. After her speech, Eric Dane, now fully recovered and back to work, came over to greet Jennifer with a warm smile. "Jennifer," he began, "you've come a long way since the first time we met. I never imagined that a skiing accident would lead to such a transformation." Jennifer smiled back and replied, "Neither did I, Eric, but I know we still have a lot of work to do." The two discussed the progress at Central Heights and how it had influenced the wider healthcare industry. Eric shared that many other hospitals in the Nova Health system had started implementing similar programs, learning from the reforms at Central Heights. "You know, Jennifer," Eric said, "I never imagined that my trip to Central Heights would be the start of such a journey. You've not only changed one hospital, but you've helped me rediscover my passion for this work." Hearing those words, Jennifer felt a surge of emotion. She had come a long way, from a quiet, overlooked nurse to a leader bringing about real change. She knew that the road ahead was still long, and that there would be many challenges to come, but she no longer felt fear or isolation. With Eric and her team by her side, Jennifer Garner had become a symbol of resilience and strength in the fight against injustice, and she knew she would continue this journey with greater conviction than ever before. Upon returning to Central Heights, Jennifer Garner was warmly welcomed by Lisa, a colleague who had once been distant, but had now become a trusted ally. The hospital now had a fresh, invigorating atmosphere, filled with cooperation and unity, unlike anything seen before. Doctors, nurses, and medical staff worked together as a true team, putting aside old barriers to focus on their common goal. Laughter and friendly conversations could be heard throughout the hospital, a stark contrast to the tense environment of the past. As Jennifer walked through the main hall, she paused in front of a newly completed mural. The mural depicted a diverse group of healthcare workers collaborating in a harmonious environment. Beneath it, a message read, "Diversity is our strength. Inclusion is our promise. Compassion is our mission." Jennifer's heart warmed as she read those words. She knew they weren't just a slogan, but embodied the new spirit of Central Heights. Time has shown that only through mutual respect and understanding could they build a stronger, more equitable healthcare system. As she entered her office, where new challenges awaited, Jennifer smiled. She knew her journey at Central Heights was just beginning. Change wasn't only about actions, but also about shifting mindsets and hearts. And she was ready for it all, determined to create a healthcare system where everyone is treated with fairness and compassion. Finally, Dr. Mueller was stunned when he realized the patient he had ignored was none other than the new hospital CEO, who would ultimately judge his performance. His arrogance and discrimination had come at a great cost. Do you think he deserved this outcome? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories. See you next time.